In 1455, the haunting fields of Wallachia were dotted with skeletons on pikes, an eerie silence broken only by the flapping wings of bats swirling over the scene. Amid this grim spectacle, a determined woman named Lisa stepped toward an imposing castle. The doors creaked open, welcoming her into the lair of the man she sought, Vlad Dracula Tepes. Cloaked in shadows, Dracula met her gaze, intrigued as she boldly declared her desire to study medicine. Fascinated by her thirst for knowledge, Dracula led her into his chambers, filled with scientific marvels. They bonded over shared curiosity and an unspoken understanding, sparking a connection that would span years. 2 decades later, Lisa had become a beloved healer in her village, devoted to helping others. Yet, suspicion brewed among the townsfolk, led by a zealous bishop who viewed her scientific tools as devil engines and accused her of witchcraft. On the day of her trial, she stood tied to a stake before a fearful crowd, the bishop condemning her as an agent of Satan. Lisa, desperate to protect the people from their own ignorance, looked skyward and whispered, "Don't hurt them. They don't understand. Be better than them." Her words, meant for her husband Dracula, fell on deaf ears. Far away, Dracula returned to find Lisa's home in ashes, her absence crushing his soul. An old woman relayed the grim news. Lisa was to be burned. Grief-stricken, Dracula felt his heart break as tears of blood streamed down his face. In a low, chilling voice, he warned the woman to take her family and flee. Then he turned toward the cathedral, where he would face the men responsible for his wife's death. Surrounded by dancing flames, Dracula confronted the townspeople, demanding answers. The bishop smugly accused Lisa of witchcraft, but Dracula defended her as a woman of science and warned the villagers he would give them 1 year to make peace before he unleashed his wrath. Back in his castle, Dracula prepared to summon an army of demons to exact vengeance, his mind consumed with fury. His son, Alucard, tried to reason with him, pleading for restraint, but Dracula, blinded by pain, struck him down. The year passed, and the people of Wallachia gathered in the Targovast Cathedral, taunting Dracula's supposed empty threats. Dark clouds churned overhead, and a storm of blood drenched the earth. The ground shook, windows shattered, and the archbishop was impaled by flying shards of glass. As fire erupted, Dracula's face appeared, furious and terrible, leading a demonic army that tore through the villagers and left the town in smoldering ruin. In the wake of destruction, Dracula unleashed his minions on neighboring towns, Arges, Severin, Grissit, Chilia, and Enissara, spreading fear like wildfire. 80 miles from Targoviste, in a quiet tavern near Gressit, 2 cousins, Bosha and Kobe, shared a drink. The door burst open as Peter, a frantic local, stumbled in with terrifying news. Dracula's forces were attacking Gressit. Bosha scoffed, dismissing it as long overdue revenge on the old families. A man nearby, quietly listening, tensed at Bosha's sneer against the Belmonts. He knew that sooner or later he would be called to face the darkness. In the bustling tavern of Murdenu, a man named Bosha sat among the noise, venting his grievances about the Belmont family to anyone who would listen. His voice cut through the room, drawing the irritated gaze of a lone traveler seated nearby. The stranger, attempting to ignore Bosha's rant, pushed through the crowd to order another drink, only to have the bartender refuse him until he paid up. As he dug through his pockets, Bosha's eyes fixed on a crest stitched onto his shirt, the Belmont family crest. The realization hit Bosha hard. He pointed, his voice dripping with venom, accusing the Belmonts of unleashing horrors upon the world and rousing the terror of Dracula. With newfound purpose, he urged the stranger to confess his sins, eyeing this as his chance to end a Belmont. The man, uneasy yet calm, dismissed Bosha's demands and tried to leave, but Bosha and his cousin Cobb barred his way. Tensions flared, and in the scuffle that followed, Bosha delivered a sharp kick, finally provoking the man to announce his name, Trevor Belmont, the last of his kind. Trevor, unsteady and reeking of drink, tried to defend himself, but found his movements sluggish. He swung a few punches, only to be countered by Cobb's brutal chair slam that sent him crashing to the floor. Bruised and staggering, Trevor somehow managed to escape the tavern, stumbling into the night. By morning, Trevor awoke in the forest, sore and weary. Through the trees, he spotted the desolate city of Gressit in the distance, and driven by hunger, trudged toward it. As he neared the city, he glimpsed some of Dracula's creatures retreating, their twisted silhouettes against the smoke and flames of Gressit. Inside, he bought a meal and picked up grim tidings from the locals. The townspeople spoke of relentless nightly attacks by Dracula's army, with the city defenseless. Only a group known as the Speakers dared to help, while others put misplaced hope in a bishop or an ancient legend of the sleeping soldier, said to awaken and protect the people. Unmoved by the city's plight, Trevor scoffed as he passed a mass grave, his disdain evident. But when he saw two churchmen harassing an elderly speaker, he couldn't turn away. Trevor stepped in, sending the bullies running, then helped the old man, who introduced himself as the elder of the Kudri Speakers. Grateful, the elder invited Trevor to their shelter, where he explained the speaker's mission to aid the suffering townsfolk. He spoke of Dracula's wrath after the tragic burning of his wife, and of the speaker's quest to find the fabled sleeping soldier. The elder's grandchild, he added, had ventured into the city's catacombs seeking this legendary figure, but hadn't returned. Trevor, embittered by his past with the church, dismissed the elder's plea with a cynical joke, suggesting he might just climb a tree and watch the town burn. Shocked, the elder pleaded with him to help, but Trevor reminded him that the Belmonts were no longer allies of the church. Knowing the speakers were determined to stay, Trevor struck a deal with the elder. If he found and rescued the elder's grandchild, the speakers would agree to leave Gresset before nightfall. Hesitant but understanding, the elder agreed, knowing it might be their only chance to survive the night. Trevor Belmont reaches the catacombs only to find himself stumped. There's no obvious way down. A faint glimmer catches his eye, revealing a hidden entrance. Squeezing through, he tumbles into the dark depths with surprising agility. Chuckling at his landing, he ventures deeper, but the floor suddenly gives way, plunging him further. To his surprise, the burial chamber below is lit, casting an eerie glow on the statues surrounding him. One statue, bearing the likeness of a speaker, catches his attention. Then, heavy footsteps echo in the shadows. A hulking cyclops lumbers forward, its single eye gleaming. Before he can react, it fires a deadly beam, forcing Trevor to duck behind a stone column. Seeing his chance, Trevor hurls his short sword, striking the beast's chest, but it barely recoils. With a swift flick of his whip, he retrieves the blade, then ascends to higher ground. Timing his move perfectly, he kicks the sword into the Cyclops' head, killing it instantly. As the creature falls, the speaker statue transforms back into a young woman. Surprised, Trevor expected a man. She introduces herself as Trevor Belmont and insists on continuing her search for the legendary sleeping warrior. Trevor, skeptical, warns her that the speaker's survival depends on leaving. Reluctantly, she agrees. Returning to the speaker's house, they're greeted by an overjoyed elder. Sifa, apologizing for failing her quest, remains determined to return to the catacombs. Trevor warns of Dracula's traps and intends to leave, but the elder's plea convinces him to stay a little longer. On his way to find some ale, Trevor is ambushed by clergymen, delivering a summons from the bishop. Inside the church, the bishop speaks with arrogance, calling the attacks divine punishment. Trevor is disgusted but agrees to leave. Back at the speaker's house, he relays the bishop's twisted plans. As night falls, demons descend on Gresset, while an angry mob gathers to hunt the speakers. Removing his cloak, Trevor stands tall, revealing the Belmont crest, declaring, "For Wallachia." He charges forward, launching a fierce counterattack against the mob and clergy, determined to defend the speakers and his people as dark shadows loom over the city. Trevor Belmont races through the streets, pursued by an angry mob, oblivious to the greater danger closing in. Inside the church, the bishop kneels in prayer, expecting news of the speakers. But when he hears the door creak, it's not his followers. It's the leader of the demon horde, flanked by nightmarish creatures. The demon mocks the bishop, taunting him that God has abandoned him, yet the bishop remains steadfast in his faith. Meanwhile, Trevor finds himself cornered in the town square. Just as the mob advances, a ring of fire blazes around him. On a nearby rooftop, Sifa casts a spell, startling the townsfolk. She clears a safe path through the crowd, allowing Trevor to confront the lead clergyman. Instead of fighting, Trevor exposes the clergyman's corruption, blaming him and the bishop for the town's suffering. Realizing the deception, the people turn on their leader, chaos erupting. Suddenly, an explosion echoes through the square. The demon horde has arrived. Trevor quickly rallies the townsfolk, organizing a defense. Men with polearms form a barrier, swords are coated in salt, and holy water is prepared. Sifa draws the demons toward the square, trapping them with ice walls as Trevor douses them in holy water. The townsfolk strike, overwhelming the horde in a fierce clash. The demon leader, who has already slain the bishop, charges at Trevor, but Sypha strikes it down with ice spears. The ground suddenly gives way beneath Trevor and Sypha, plunging them deep into the catacombs. They land in a vast chamber filled with gears, and, tumbling further, arrive in a room with a coffin linked to blood siphons. As Trevor examines it, he accidentally triggers a mechanism, opening the coffin. From it, a man with a blood-red gash on his chest rises. Sypha thinks he's the sleeping warrior of legend, but Trevor suspects he's Dracula. The man, Alucard, son of Dracula, confirms neither. After a fierce battle, he reveals his mission: to stop his father. Together, they agree to join forces, setting out to save Wallachia.